In this episode, I talked to Mark Loosemore of IRESS about using technology to improve client engagement. We cover client data, the connected world, social media and more. Mark's interview is packed with tips and ideas you can follow up. That's all right here in episode 78 of the Marketing, Protection and Finance podcast.
Welcome. You're listening to the podcast for financial services professionals looking to share business ideas and inspiration in the world of marketing, protection and finance. So let's get on with the show, and here's your host, Roger Edwards.
Welcome folks to the MAPF podcast, and thanks as always for streaming or downloading this episode and giving me and my guests some of your valuable time. If you have 2 more minutes, please can you share the podcast with one friend or one colleague, either by email or social media. Let's grow the audience so that I can continue to bring you great guests who'll share their ideas and insights with you. Tell them to check out rogeredwards.co.uk/MPAF. And if you're looking for help with your marketing strategy, content or social media, or perhaps you need a speaker for your next meeting or conference, I'd like to help you. Do please get in touch at rogeredwards.co.uk. So let's have a look at 7 ways to use technology to improve client engagement, courtesy of Mark Loosemore. Mark is Executive General Manager for Wealth for IRESS UK. With expertise in IT company sales strategy and e-commerce in financial services, Mark is a well-known speaker in the UK on everything digital. So here's that interview right here on the Marketing, Protection and Finance podcast. So Mark, welcome to the MAPF podcast.
Thank you very much.
And Mark, tell me, where are we Skyping each other from today?
I'm down in Warwick. I live in Stratford-upon-Avon, which isn't too far away, but we're in sunny Warwick today.
And of course, I'm in Edinburgh. Mark, today we are going to talk about 7 ways to use technology to improve client engagement. But before we get to that, what would be really interesting is if you could tell the listeners of the MAPF podcast a little bit about yourself, where you come from, where you're going, what your ambitions are, and basically what makes Mark Loosemore tick.
Okay. I was born in Wales and passionate Welsh supporter of rugby and football. I enjoy life, I enjoy work, and most importantly, I enjoy and love my family very much and enjoy spending time with them. Trying to get fit at the moment, so I've just taken up running just over a year ago, and I've signed up for the London Marathon in April. So my drive at the moment is to run that and raise a bit of money for Click Sargent, which is a charity that looks after kids with cancer. So a little plug, anyone want to go on my Just Giving page and donate, please feel free.
That's quite an ambition to go for a London Marathon within a year. Running's something that I'm quite fit. I'm actually a fitness instructor in my spare time, but running's just something I just can't do. But my wife's encouraged me to enter a 5K later in the year, so I think that's about as far as I'm going to get.
Yeah, well, I started off, probably to be fair, about 18 months ago, doing the Couch to 5K app on the iPhone, and that drove me to 5K, and then somehow I accidentally ended up doing a half marathon in September, and now the London Marathon. I'm suffering a little bit, I think.
And of course, Mark, you work for IRESS, which is a well-known company in the financial services industry, providing quotations and other information for financial planners. Just tell me a little bit about IRESS, where you are at the moment and what your current plans are.
Okay, well, IRESS is an Australian company by origin, floated on the stock market over in Australia. I joined IRESS back in the end of 2011 when IRESS was just entering the UK. Really it's been a story of growth since then. With a number of acquisitions along the way. Most significant acquisition was of a company called Develo, who do the quotation systems that you're talking about, but also have very strong back office systems such as Advisor Office and Officeweb, and also own mortgage sourcing systems such as Trigold. Further acquisitions happened at the end of last year, a company called Pulse and a company called ProQuote, and really the UK now is the growth engine of IRESS globally and continues to get that investment. A very exciting time to be at IRESS.
Yeah, and I think before Avello, it was the exchange, wasn't it? So I'm showing my age there by remembering all the different brands that have led to where you are today. So, Mark, it's very interesting that I think you're out and about at the moment, giving people a bit of an insight into how technology can help them with their customer engagement. I thought it'd be quite useful and very interesting for the listeners of the MAPF podcast to hear these 7 tips that you've got. So why don't we sort of just launch into it, start working our way through the 7 and see where we get to. So how about we start at number 1? And of course, starting at the beginning is a very good place to start.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So for me, the first point that I always talk to people about is client data. And actually making sure that you've got your client data right. I think it's something that we tend to often simplify and just assume that we're going to put a new system in and we're just going to transfer it for data over, and everything's going to be hunky-dory, and almost a magic wand is waved and the data comes correct overnight. The truth is, we need to invest time to understand that data and clean that data before we can use it. Now, the interesting thing for me isn't just getting the data right. Once you've got the data right, it's what we do with that. So we then need to convert that to information and into knowledge and ultimately into wisdom. And I'll give you a little example of that. If data is just, say, an answer to a question, maybe we're talking about an attitude to risk questionnaire, so the data is the answer to that question within there. Information is how we link that data together to come up with a fact, so we can link those answers together to come up with that we are a balanced risk profile. But that's only the start of the journey. We really want to turn that into knowledge, and the knowledge is really about what we do with that, how we combine that information with our own expertise to actually come up with something of value to the end client. So in that case, you're a balanced profiler. That means you should be in this asset allocation. And when we turn that to wisdom, that is when we're using our systems to give us proactive alerts that maybe something's changed and therefore we need to change something in the way that we're operating with our clients. So maybe the stock market's moved, some of that underlying data therefore has changed, and now our asset allocation is now out of sync with our risk profile, so we can impart to the client proactively that they need to take some action. So it's really how we go along that journey. Now, the challenge with all of that is unless you get that data correct at the start, the rest of that falls down. So that comes back to the importance of acquiring data and acquiring it electronically. And that's not easy. As long as I've been in this industry, and I've probably been working with IFAs and financial advisors on this for about 25 years, people have said, well, yeah, but I don't want to take a computer to see a client. I don't want a laptop sitting between me and the client. That breaks the chemistry between us. Now, we are seeing that change, and that's because we have things like tablets. So whereas the barrier of the screen used to be the issue, a tablet is now handed across to a client to involve them in entering the data. We're also seeing things like fact finds put electronically online so that people can actually engage with that fact find, enter the data themselves in their own time when they're not feeling pressured, when they're not worried about having to find a piece of data in a file and looking disorganized to their financial advisor, where they're not worried that they're paying for the time of the advisor in front of them, and actually get that data right. Now, if we do that, we can really get the cost of data acquisition down, get more data in, and therefore move along this curve. So my number one tip would be get your client data straight, invest time in doing it, and invest time in getting the client involved in helping you get that right.
I remember being involved with a company a while back, setting up a new system, and I think at the time, right at the start, what that company didn't do, and it was expedient at the time in terms of development, was include within the data something to notify us whether the client had ticked the box to say whether it was okay for us to contact them in future from a communications point of view. And without that data, you break the Data Protection Act if you actually contacted them. So we effectively excluded for many, many years a whole cohort of clients simply because at the time it saved a little bit of cash not to collect that piece of data.
Yeah, I think you're right. And if you don't get that right at the start, then you live with that legacy for a long period of time. You've either got to go back to a whole host of clients to get them to change that, or you're running a two-tier servicing model, which isn't really sustainable. So you're right. You need to sit down at the start of the journey and make sure that you're addressing this in a controlled and consistent manner.
Yeah, we definitely don't want two tiers. So number one, very interesting, data. Let's move on to number two.
So number two, really, for me, is looking around the tools and calculators that are out there now to actually help people maximize the use of that data. Those tools are a whole host of things. So that, you mentioned the exchange. There can be things like comparative engines, but I'm also thinking here of cash flow planning tools. I'm thinking of, we talked about asset allocation before and attitude to risk. So they could be the attitude to risk type questionnaires. They could be stochastic modeling. There's some good portfolio management solutions there as well. And there's a real uptake in those sort of tools in the marketplace, particularly cash flow planning. Now, cash flow planning hasn't yet become mainstream, i.e. maybe over 50%, but it's getting there within the financial planning market. And I had a really interesting chat with a lady that was very senior in the IFP, and she explained to me why it was so important to her, and I've taken that lesson on, and that for her was that if we are existing in a transactional world, so we're just selling a protection policy, we're just selling an ISA, that it's quite price sensitive, and it's difficult in a post-RDR world to really justify fees for that selling of that ISA or simple investment product. If we start moving to a world where we're doing financial advice and we're actually getting into analysing people's situation, then it becomes a little less price sensitive. If we do that across multiple needs, the price sensitivity comes down again. But if we go all the way to lifestyle and cash flow planning, then it becomes very much that the focus is on what is actually being done for the client, what money's been saved in terms of, in terms of the tax position, what they've actually helped them understand where they want to go in terms of their goals, and people less worried about the price and they're more worried about the value they're getting from the process. So I think for me, number two is how do we use those tools to take advantage of the data. The other thing that someone once said to me about this, a gentleman called Dennis Hall from Yellowtail Financial Planning, he said the reason why he uses these tools is that he can produce institutional quality documentation from these tools, but he's got the advantage that he's got the personal relationship that maybe the institutions will struggle to get. So by using this sort of technology, we can look and seem as solid and as robust as those big institutions, but we're giving that personalized service. We have that relationship and some really good knowledge that we've got ourselves to combine together to give a really compelling proposition to our clients. So number two, tools and calculators.
Let's move on to number three, Mark.
So the third thing for me is really just getting aware of the overall connected world. So I call number three connected world, and this is really about making sure that we're linking electronically to as many different parties as we can out there. So the obvious one is the client, and we'll talk a little bit more about that one later, I think. But making sure that you have means that the client can communicate with you electronically but securely, and I'll come back to that. But it shouldn't just be about the client. So we're talking to advisors. We often talk about how they're actually linking to the platforms and the product providers electronically. Can you get client valuation data down into your systems electronically? Can you get that at a transactional level so that you've actually got accurate transactional data? Can you link to your partners? So if you're working with an accountancy, maybe you're in the protection world and you're working with or a mortgage world and you're working with an estate agent, is there data you want to share with them electronically? I've seen some really good examples of estate agents linking up with mortgage brokers and the estate agents have a means of electronically entering the leads for the broker, and the broker electronically keeps the estate agent informed of the progress. If they're engaging with employers, how are you engaging with them electronically? Are you giving them systems to be able to access things? The regulator. Are you how are you managing your relationship with the regulator, or even professional bodies? So there's lots of different parties that I think we need to join together. And if we start joining those together, I think coming back to that very first point of data, that data can become timely and it can have increased accuracy, and the cost of acquiring that data can be a lot lower. So it all comes back to that, and then once we've got it, we can drive efficiencies into the process, and ultimately back down to the client, we improve the service levels that we give the client. So number 3 for me is the connected world.
And of course, if you're a financial planner working for a network or something like that, it's likely that the centre has created these connections for you. But if you're a one-man band or a smaller company, it's going to be very difficult to do this yourself. So presumably there are people out there who can help you to connect all of these gizmos together.
So I think practice management systems such as the ones that we provide, I mentioned Advisor Office and Xplan, those sort of solutions you can and our competitors too would allow you to do those connections. And really, it's about embracing systems such as that to make sure you connect effectively.
Fantastic. Let's move on to number 4, Mark.
So number 4, I'm going to be a little, I don't know if this is controversial or not. Sometimes I say this to financial advisors and they're so keen to tell me how they're already doing this. Other people tell me they will never go down this route at all, but I want to talk about social media.
Yay!
And it's a real split. I was at a conference last week, and the audience was completely divided on social media. And there were people there that were driving significant business to their businesses through social media, one through Facebook and using the boost functionality on Facebook to sort of extend his reach out to the market. Another person was using LinkedIn very effectively. Other people didn't want to go near it. Now what I say to people about social media is, first of all, think of it as in 2 ways, because you don't have to do everything with social media. And one, think of it as listening, and the other, think about it as putting out your message. Because I think we tend to automatically think about Twitter as just tweeting to people, or Facebook as posting to people. Actually, they're a very useful information source of information and data as well. And I think we talk in the real world about having 2 ears and 1 mouth, but we're the same in technology. I think we have 2 eyes, and we need to use those eyes on the screen to listen, to pick up what our clients are saying. And if we're tracking some of our clients' activity, I mean, simple things like some of the CRM systems, and certainly sort of Xplan would do this, will enable you to have a feed, have your feeds from your social media on there. So you can, before you go out and see the client, you can simply look up what they've recently put up on Twitter or Facebook or whatever they may be in. So you have an icebreaker when you go and see your client. So you can see and show that you're genuinely interested in their life. I've actually seen a case study from Australia where it went further, and people were proactively monitoring the social media to improve their service levels. So a very sad story, but one advisor spotted that one of his clients' daughter had got leukemia, and he spotted that on social media, but he used that as a service point where he approached the client, reassured them not to worry about the financial aspects, that he had the various policies in place that would help out to focus on the daughter while he took care of that side of things. And it was that sort of proactive service you can do by listening. So normally we start talking about social media about how we can pass out a message, but I didn't want to miss the listening people. And it's not for everyone. Some people say, no, that's too big, brother, I'm not going to do that. That's fine. But some people are finding that useful. If we talk about broadcasting, then I think there's a number of different medias to talk, social media sites to talk about. I think we do often focus on Facebook. I think Facebook is quite engaging on a personal side. On the business side, I tend to find people more focused on Twitter and LinkedIn.
Yeah.
LinkedIn, is really powerful, but to me is more referenceable. People will use it not just as a glorified address book, but they'll also use it to read information, posts, blogs, etc. Twitter I find far more conversational, and I think therefore Twitter can build relationships more. So I think you can use Twitter very well to sort of get across your expertise and build that relationship. I've seen Twitter used so badly though as well in financial services. The number of people that I sign up to and the next day get, or even the same day, you get a tweet from them or a direct message from them saying, I've got a great investment for you, or can I offer you a free financial review? I don't know them yet.
No.
Twitter's about building that rapport, building that relationship, having conversations, and then they will come to you. And I think that's quite a hard discipline, but it shouldn't be about flogging product. Not least, this is still in a compliance regime. The tweet will stand alone in the compliance, even if it links to the website, it's got to stand alone in terms of its integrity. So we need to stay away from doing the sales pitch on Twitter and focus on relationships, I believe, as well.
I think you're making some great points here, and to be perfectly honest, we could do an entire podcast on this subject. To me, social media is it's a big issue in the financial services industry. I think that we've got two ends of the spectrum. I know that there are some people out there who won't use it at all, and that's perhaps because their compliance people have said, we don't want you on Twitter, full stop, end of. And then you've got people at the other end of the spectrum who are using it, as you say, very, very productively and very, very successfully to get customers and to get relationships. But I think that the point that I would like to re-emphasise that you've made there already, Mark, is that remember that this is social media. It's about engagement. It's about building relationships. It's about having conversations. It isn't broadcast media. So yes, you can point people to content that you've written or videos that you've recorded, but it shouldn't be used as out and out publicity, because that's not really what social media is all about. And the listening thing is just so important as well. And one of the things I often do is use the Twitter search facility, and I'll put a keyword in the search bar like, say, life insurance or financial advice, and if you put the question mark after the search term, then you'll be returned with a load of questions that people have been asking with that search term in. So for example, if you put life insurance question mark, somebody might have asked a question somewhere which says, where should I look for the best life insurance policy? And that gives you an opportunity to engage with that person and maybe answer that question, rather than, as you've said, sending them a direct message and saying, hey, come to me, I'll sell you a life insurance policy. So it's about listening to what people are saying. I think these are really, really interesting points. But rather than getting completely obsessed with social media, perhaps we should move on to number 5.
So number 5 for me is client management systems. I earlier called them practice management systems. I think there's a huge debate on what you might call them. And again, just like I said with LinkedIn, this has got to be more than a glorified address book. So this isn't just about storing all your client details in there, particularly just limiting it to name and address. This has to be rich data within there. So we want to store all the information about the client portfolio within there. We want to link that up through that connected world to make sure that data is updated so that we've got the current position in there. We also want to actually drive workflow processes through the client management system, and they can be quite simple processes like client onboarding processes, or a review process within that. But if we do that and we drive behaviours, we can get consistent behaviours across our business for all our clients, which I think is absolutely key, and I know the regulator is keen on as well. The other thing I think that gives us the advantage to do, if we start driving workflow processes through the system, we start monitoring and logging client touch points in the system, we can then start benchmarking the service levels that we're giving our clients. So we could have a service level agreement with a client that says we're going to have 2 meetings per year face-to-face with them. We're going to give them a quarterly touch base by phone, and we're going to send them out a monthly newsletter. In addition, maybe I'm going to refer one of my team to speak to them about tax once a year as well. I don't know, whatever the service level that you set up with them, we can then graphically within the practice management system be comparing how are we doing against this. And I would love, incidentally, for people to be bold enough to then put that up on the digital platform and actually share how we're doing with a client. But even if you're not, just so that you know, are you meeting your commitments to that client? Are you exceeding your commitments to that client? Because if you're not, the client will be feeling it and will be unhappy in the background. It's much better that you know it up front so you can address it. So I think just trying to be a little bit more proactive in how we're using our back office systems. And I'd also say, don't just leave this to holding data about clients. Hold data on your partners, your professional advisors that you're working with. Hold data on your advisors and your staff. Hold their T&C information within here. Get rid of all those little spreadsheets that you had around your business that was looking at qualifications, looking at complaints management, look at gifts and registers and stuff like that, and hold all of that within the same central database, because there's lots of interactions between that data, and I think it's really important to have it in one place.
Again, it's all about engagement, isn't it, Mark? I think this is just another opportunity to engage with your clients, engage with your customers. So that's number 5. Let's move on to number 6.
Okay, well, number 6 for me is your digital presence. And I think this is, again, somewhat controversial in the industry, depending on how far people want to go. And I hasten to add, there's probably no right answer. Different people's services proposition to their clients will need different levels of digital presence. I do think, that it is a hygiene factor to have a website of some sort. I know not everybody does in the industry yet, but I think that's becoming increasingly rare. I think the quality of those websites vary, and I think how interactive those websites are varies. But I think, we are seeing people put little tools on there to do some basic analysis, even if it's people like me type analysis tools onto a public website. So phase 1 of digital presence is a website. I then think we look at private portals on the website for clients to access information about themselves that you hold, and also to communicate with the advice firm as well. So phase 2 is to create those sort of digital portals. Now, often those portals are created to share information about portfolios and show progress against those portfolios. I think very quickly they tend to move on to the communication mechanism. Stuff that you would like to email but you can't because the data is too sensitive and would involve a whole load of encryption. Maybe a fact find report or a financial report. People are now putting on the portal and then emailing the client saying, look, the latest financial plan is up on the portal, log in and draw it down. And it becomes that communication mechanism and an audit trail for the client that they've got everything that they needed up there as well. I think the other thing I would mention on that portal is I think people want apps. So I think people are looking now to have an app that gives them that same access to communication with their advisor, and that's very much part of it. So we start digital presence website, we then move to the client portal, and then we get into the more hotly debated topics of, do we go to execution type services, Hargreaves Lansdown type services, or do we go all the way to robo-advice? And I think robo-advice is the one that's got the sort of the big momentum for discussion in the market. Even with robo-advice, though, I think there's so many different interpretations of what that means is involved in that. So I've seen examples such as SEDSO, which is a service out there which is really looking at engaging with the client online, does the fact find online, does gets all the data electronically from the client, but it's people behind the scenes that are then analysing that and producing the financial reports and executing on any recommendations once they've engaged. So in their case, it's less robo and more remote advice, but it's kind of been linked into that same term, all the way through to maybe you've got services like money on toast, which you can use to buy an ISA, etc. As well. And actually, some of those aren't coming from necessarily big companies. I think it's Chapters Financial that just said so. CPN. They're not necessarily the huge companies, but they are companies with vision and knowing how they want to engage with their clients in the future. So I think it's a really interesting space at the moment.
And we are finally at number 7, Mark.
Yeah, so number 7 for me is all around personal data management. So maybe it's a little bit more looking into the future. I'm looking at some of the services such as the Verify service that the government uses at the moment. It's a Verify service is like a digital passport, really. And when I ask people how many people have used it, no one ever puts their hand up. But actually, it has huge coverage in the general population now, and it's used on the government sites to enable you to have your identity checked as you move through different services. So if you go and renew your driving license, or you've lost your passport and you want a new passport, or you're paying your road tax, it's that same digital passport that you're taking around with you. Now, it doesn't take too much imagination to say, can that data set be extended? And can it be used for other functions in the financial services world? So, I believe there's conversations with some of the industry bodies like TISA and also some of the banks where they're looking at, can this be used for account opening? And if we ultimately extend it to fact-find data, can it take data around with you as well? So I think it becomes a really interesting space. And then I think you add things like pensions dashboards onto it, where some of the countries now, and the UK has put an intention to do this, have a centralised place where you can go and get your latest pensions information, not just your state benefits, but the pensions that you've got out there as well. You can get that from a central location. And I think going right the way back to point number 1 on client data, we're going to have a wealth of data available to the end consumer here that is potentially also available to the advisors. And we need to be quite comfortable of the role that the advisor plays in this, because it's not just about presenting data anymore. It's about what can we add to that data to create it into information, to create it to knowledge, to create it to wisdom, and it becomes a really interesting dynamic. So my final one is keep an eye on this whole space of personal data management and the role in government in that area.
Fantastic, Mark. We have cantered through one hell of a lot of information this morning. Well, I'm sat here thinking that each of these 7 points that you've made today could have actually been a standalone podcast all on their own. Right. So maybe that's something IRESS needs to think about. You've got enough material here to start an IRESS podcast. So we've looked at data. That was number 1. Number 2 was tools and calculators. We talked number 3 about the connected world. Number 4 was social media. Number 5 was client management. Number 6 was digital presence, and finally personal data management. Mark, is it possible that you could almost condense everything we've talked about today into the one thing that you'd like those people listening to the MAPF podcast today to take away from what we've talked about?
Probably the biggest thing for me is going back to number 1, which is why I put it at number 1, is get your data right. Everything else stems from that. If I was to add anything else to that, is once you're then using that data, the only way to keep it accurate, keep it right, is to try and do as much as you can from a unified system. So use one system across as much of your processes and as many of your processes as you can. So you've got one version of the truth always. So that'll probably be my biggest thing. Knowing
your customer, I think that's where we have to start, isn't it? Knowing your customer quite intimately with the data that's available. Mark, it's been fascinating to go through these 7 ideas with you this morning. Before we go, I always like to finish the podcast with 4 very quick fire business questions, and we'll go straight into that now. Wow, Mark, what's the one thing that you change about the financial services industry if someone gave you a magic wand to wave?
About apathy towards it from the general public. It frustrates me that people still don't plan properly for their retirement. They are underinvested and underprotected. So probably my change would be for the general public to wake up to the importance of the industry.
Is there one business model, or it could be a product or a campaign, that's caught your attention in the last year? Tell us what it was and what you liked about it.
Can I big up our own marketing department on that? Because we did a really interesting one using social media on client service, because I think it's something that we often forget, and I'm sure many firms forget, is just how many successful client touch points that we have. So what we started to do was each time we had a positive statement back from a client to our support desk or to our sales team or to our delivery team, we captured it and we put it out on Twitter with the same hashtag. We created a Twitter wall about it, and we really built up some momentum about good service moments, and I think the marketing team really got that out on social media.
Tell us about an app or a gadget that's made a huge difference to your working life.
I'm going to be really boring and go for the iPhone. I just remember how far, when I first started in the early 90s, we used to do everything. I had a paper-based A to Z. I had an alarm clock that was waking me up in the morning. I'd have a different paper-based diary, maybe a filofax, and all these different gadgets going around. I had a camera, a video camera, split up. And now we have one unified platform. So just like I was saying with the unified technology in your business, the iPhone is my dream of one unified piece of technology that does so many different things for me.
What's the best business book you've ever read? Tell us what it was and what you liked about it.
Okay, I'm going to go slightly. I don't know whether you count this as a business book or not, but I'll go for it. It's probably Bounce by Matthew Said, and it was actually a sports book that talks about how there is he would say there is no such thing as being born with a natural talent, and actually, there are some people that have physical things that will help them. A tall person might be good at basketball, but actually, there is no such thing as actually being born with a native talent for tennis or running, etc. And that actually comes from practice, and it comes through patterns that you learn within the sport. And I think that you then apply that to the business world, which he goes on to do. I think we often forget that. So we will take people that have no relevant practice and experience and put them in a job and wonder why, which isn't the same, and wonder why they fail. Now, Matthew Said was a table tennis player, and he was put in a tennis match and he couldn't hit the ball. And I think we try and take someone and we think that job's quite similar. They'll fly, or we'll procure a system from a software supplier that is a generic CRM supplier but has never done anything in financial services and expect it to work in financial services. So I think that's probably it's a really good read. It's a really interesting read. It's one that sort of you can apply to your personal interest, and then actually you step back and it applies really nicely to your work life as well. So a fascinating book. I recommend it.
Fantastic. Mark, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people out there going to want to get in touch with you after hearing your ideas this morning. So tell me, what's the best way that they should connect with you?
Probably by email, mark.loosemore@irs.co.uk. But obviously follow me on Twitter or on LinkedIn as well.
Fantastic. Mark, thanks for coming on the podcast today. Thanks for your ideas. Thanks for all 7 of them. And as I say, a lot of material to get through, but I've taken a lot from what I've heard this morning, and hopefully everyone listening in will have done the same. I'll include the links to things we've talked about on the show notes for this podcast, which is at rogeredwards.co.uk/MPAF. That's rogeredwards.co.uk/MPAF. Mark, thanks for coming on.
Pleasure.
Good luck for the future, and hope to catch up with you again soon.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Marketing Protection and Finance Podcast. Do please look at the show notes at rogeredwards.co.uk/MPAF for links to the apps and topics and books we discussed. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review on iTunes. Simply visit rogeredwards.co.uk/iTunes and leave a review. If you are a provider or advisor or journalist and you have a product, campaign or business model you'd like to talk about, please get in touch. You can be the next guest on the show. And do remember, nothing we talk about on the show is financial advice of any kind. It's all just thoughts and opinions, okay?